Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 184, Julius II, the Warrior Pope Rising.
Lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
Before we took a break to do a recap, we had followed the fall of the Borgias all the way up to the death of Cesare in 1507. We saw that his downfall had started with the death of his father, Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, in 1503. So let's go back there for a moment. We know that one of the great enemies of the Borgias, they had many, had been Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who had wanted to be pope himself for quite a while, at least going back to the conclave of 1492 that had elected the Borgia pope. In 1503, he had hoped to finally get his wish with the death of his arch-enemy, but was not able to muster a sufficient number of votes. So a compromise pope was elected in the person of Francesco Todeschini Piccolomini. Now, the job of a compromise pope was to last long enough for the factions to get their act together and manage to elect a more lasting pope, but at the same time not last too long. Piccolomini, who took the name of Pius III in honor of his uncle Pius II, fulfilled his task very well by lasting only 26 days before dying. That didn't give him much time to leave his mark on the papacy, but it was enough for him to get a statue looking very popey in his native Siena, which you can still see to this day if you're peeking into the courtyard of Palazzo Chigi Saracini. In that same city, he also left the impressive Piccolomini Library inside the cathedral. In the next conclave, Cesare Borgia made the mistake of trusting that della Rovere would let bygones be bygones and put his support behind him, and Giuliano became Pope Julius II. We know how badly that went for Borgia. Julius became Pope at the age of 60, but he had the energy and virility of a much younger man. He enjoyed a good banquet and the company of the ladies, having fathered 3 children and picked up an unpleasant venereal disease. The position of Pope had been for some time a complicated balance between being the spiritual leader of the Christian world and the leader of a temporal state known as the Papal States. Julius very soon demonstrated that he was much more interested in the latter rather than the former. If, like me, it takes your brain a while to figure out the latter and former business, he was much more interested in lands and fighting than in spiritual stuff. It had long been a papal habit to engage in a bit of nepotism. Why, Julius II himself was a literal example of the practice. You see, the word nepotism comes from the Italian nipote, meaning nephew, and Julius was the nephew of Pope Sixtus IV. Julius didn't go quite as far as Sixtus had, and not even close to the levels that Alexander VI had reached, but he did sort out a couple of his own nephews by making them cardinals and another with a nice marriage alliance. As well as family, the new pope had to sort out Rome herself and the Papal States beyond that. The home front was pretty easy. All he had to do was allow the 2 main Roman noble families, the Colonna and the Orsini, to return after their struggle with the Borgias to reoccupy their castles and property, and they were pleased to stay in peace for a while, at least not in open rebellion. The situation in the Papal States was not so straightforward. In the north, Venice had influence over Rimini, Fano, and Faenza, where they had supported the return of their previous signori and were encroaching on Cesena and Imola, which was still under the control of Borgia troops. The Bentivoglio family had taken back Bologna, while in the south, Giampaolo Baglioni had re-entered Perugia, and Guidobaldo da Montefeltro was back in Urbino. Giovanni Sforza, instead, had taken back possession of Pesaro. Julius couldn't fight on every single front, so he decided to pick which battles to fight. He reached agreements with Giovanni Sforza for Pesaro and with Guidobaldo da Montefeltro for Urbino. That sort of put things straight in the southern part of the Papal States. To sort out the north, Julius II needed to gain control of the castles of Cesare Borgia, who was still hanging around in Rome at the time. Borgia, having overcome the illusion that he could patch things up with the Pope della Rovere, refused, and it was at this time that Cesare started on the road to exile that would lead to his death. The Pope had now gained control of the Borgia castles and could more successfully counter Venice. It was 1505 by now, and diplomatic talks with Venice led to the Serenissima, afraid of an increasing number of enemies, which included France and the Holy Roman Empire, handing over some minor cities, but not enough to satisfy Julius. For now, that situation would have to wait. He evidently felt that he had done as much as he could following the diplomatic path and felt it was time to head out to war. War is expensive, and the Borgias had not left a lot in the papal coffers. Luckily, the popes always had a way to make a quick buck: the sale of ecclesiastical offices, a sin known as simony, and the sale of indulgences. This was a practice that would really come back to bite the church quite hard on the bottom. An indulgence is when a member of the Catholic clergy forgives your sins and lets you partially or completely off the book. Of course, in exchange for this, you were expected to make a generous donation to the church. This practice would be among the complaints that a certain German priest would make just a dozen years later when he nailed up his 95 theses on the door of the church of Wittenberg Castle. That was not an issue that Julius would have to deal with. For now, his objective was to get back Perugia. Although making war was nothing new to popes, Julius took a very hands-on, practical approach and actually participated in the fighting himself. Even when he wasn't actually involved in a battle, his faithful oak wood stick was always with him, and he would quite readily use it to beat people who weren't following his orders or annoying him. Later in life, as he lay on his deathbed, he repeatedly threatened the priest who came to administer his last rites, declaring that his time had not yet come, and secretly trying to cure himself with some good wine. The stick was made of a particular kind of oak known as rovere in Italian and sessile or Durnast oak in English. You, my dear, constant and attentive listener, will remember that della Rovere was the name of Pope Julius II, so of the oak. He acted as if he were one of the common soldiers. He would spend time among them and even eat with them. As he left Rome to march on Perugia in 1506, he was supposed to have stopped on a bridge and pronounced the dramatic words, "Se le chiavi di San Pietro non bastano, valga almeno la spada di San Paolo. If the keys of St. Peter are not enough, then let the sword of St. Paul suffice." He then threw the keys into the water and drew his sword. Some sources reported that he didn't actually say this at the beginning of his campaigns in 1506, but later, around the year 1513, after the Battle of Ravenna. In any case, it was a pretty cool thing to say, and it gives you a good idea of the character of Pope Julius. It seems that someone commented to the Pope after this dramatic gesture that Jesus had told Peter to put his sword back when he was being arrested by the Roman guards, to which the Pope reportedly answered that, yes, that was true, but by then Peter had already cut off the ear of one of the servants. Whatever Julius may have said or not said, and whenever he may have said it or not said it, the game was afoot. They were headed for Perugia. The most influential man there, as we mentioned, was Giampaolo Baglioni. We first met him at the time of Cesare Borgia. He was one of Il Valentino's captains and had been involved in the plot against him. But he had been clever enough to stay away from the revenge at Senigallia, deciding to escape to the safety of the Republic of Siena. Once again, Baglioni showed he had some political wisdom, and rather than resist the Pope, he came to terms and was allowed to stay in the city. He even maintained a role in government, although much reduced. He was told that he was forgiven, for now, but if he was ever naughty again, he would pay for everything with a vengeance. Next, it was time to head up through the Apennines to the city of Bologna, which had been reoccupied by the Bentivoglio family. Along on the campaign with the Pope, Julius had a consistent number of cardinals, around 24, and was joined by the Duke of Urbino, Guidobaldo. He also at this time had the help of the French. Just a disclaimer here for a moment. As has been the case in the past, we are coming up on a time of confusing alliances, switching sides, and the control of various cities changing hands. And, of course, don't worry if you don't remember all the ups and downs and twos and throws and changes of alliance and so on. Bologna was attacked by the French coming from the west and the Pope and his forces coming from the east, and a siege ensued. In a peaceful gesture of brotherly love, the Pope promised full indulgence to those who brought him the head of an enemy. Wasn't that lovely? He entered the city, hailed by festive crowds, and felt that he needed a nice statue of himself to commemorate the event and leave it to the Bolognese in front of their cathedral of San Petronio. He hired the services of a young man we were introduced to at the time of Lorenzo the Magnificent, a certain Michelangelo Buonarroti. When the great sculptor suggested that the Pope should have a book in the hands of the statue, he answered that he had no use for books and to go ahead and just put a sword. With Bologna sorted, Julius made his way back to Rome and granted himself a proper good old Roman triumph, including passing under a triumphal arch and all that. Once home, for a while, he had an idea. When we move into a new house, no matter how nice it looks, we usually do some sort of redecorating or renovating work. At the very least, a fresh lick of paint. Well, that's what Julius did. He had already commissioned the services of the architect Donato Bramante in 1506 to start building him a nice new little church, a place you may have heard of or even seen, the Basilica of St. Peter's in the Vatican. Part of the Vatican complex was a chapel that had been built by the uncle of Julius, Pope Sixtus IV. Said chapel consequently bore the uncle's name, the Sistine Chapel. It was in this room that Julius needed a good lick of paint, so having been very pleased with the statue Michelangelo had built for him the previous year, he thought he'd call him to do a bit of a paint job. The artist protested that he was more of a sculptor, but upon the insistence of the Pope, who supported him with quite a lot of cash, he decided to take on the job. Julius's dominating and controlling personality meant that he often clashed with the artist and consistently pestered him. At the same time, there was a great mutual respect between the two men, and Michelangelo had freedom to create whatever he wanted. Since you are listening to a podcast about the history of Italy, and therefore are interested in the country and history, you may have already been to see the result. The experience in itself can be a little bit disappointing at times, since an estimated 25,000 people visit it every day. You very much have a sheep-like experience, being herded through as one of the many sardines packed in with the growing chatter regularly hushed through the microphone by one of the attendants. It's a good idea to try and visit very early in the morning or late in the evening, or even spend that little bit extra to go on a private after-hours or before-hours tour. On one of my visits with my wife, we managed to resist being herded through and actually grab two of the chairs at the side and look up the ceiling for as long as we desired, in awe and delight. It's definitely a bucket list experience. It always reminds me of the film Good Will Hunting, when Robin Williams' character tells Matt Damon's character that he's just a kid, and although he may study everything he can find about Michelangelo, he says to him, "I bet you can't tell me what it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling." So, although I was planning to go off on a big, long treatise about the Sistine Chapel and the frescoes that decorate it, I'll just tell you to go there and have a look for yourself. Having hired his new decorator, Pope Julius II now turned to the big issue at hand, sticking it to Venice. Luckily for him, there were quite a few people who had a bone to pick with the most serene republic, and soon they would get together in a little thing called the League of Cambrai. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to thank in particular my wonderful Patreon supporters, starting from the second half of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level: Jeffrey W., John W., John J., Jordan C., Joshua G., Julia G., Justin E., Kyle D., Old John in Milwaukee, Linus, Mark P., Michus Porcius, Moppet King, Paradise, Patrizia K., Rocco B., Rod L., Russell F., Sandra P., Scott L., Sean M., Shelby, Shelley, Simon, Stephen, and Tap Dance Down Under. And of course, we can never forget the tippy top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level: Lisa K., Andrew M., Peter W., David L., David C., Sen, David A., Karen D., Helenka, Bridget, Dallas, Joseph V., Stephen G., and Julian. Thank you, one and all. If, like them, you'd like to have access to ad-free episodes and extra content, you can do so by going to ahistoryofitaly.com, clicking on the support page, and becoming a Patreon supporter by clicking on Support Us on Patreon. And you can also do that by supporting us on PayPal or Tipeee. If you'd just like to get in touch, please don't hesitate to do so. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com, the email, or you can look us up on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Once again, thanks very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. You sent for me, Your Holiness.
Ah, yes, Michelangelo. Good of you to come. Listen, I'm told you do a little bit of sculpting.
I dabble a bit.
Yes, good. I want a statue done.
Okay, what's the subject? Jesus, the Madonna, Saint Peter?
No. The subject is me.
Ah, isn't that a bit...
A bit what?
I mean, shouldn't the Pope be a little more humble?
It's just a little statue.
Ah, okay, so like a statuette, one to go on a table.
Yeah, only by small I mean around 3 meters, and by on a table I mean in front of the cathedral in Bologna.
Subtle.
Yes, well, God is watching and guiding me.
What is to be the material used? Marble?
Bronze.
Bronze?
Yes, I know. I'm far too humble. I know that I deserve gold, but I am a simple man.
Ah, are you now?
Oh, and I want it a little more cheerful than the statue you did with the dead guy and his mum.
Dead guy and his mum? You mean the Pietà?
Is that what you call it? Yes, less depressing than that.
But that was the Madonna, grieving the loss of her son, your boss.
Ah, really? The ones from the handbook? I knew I should have read that more carefully.
But you think?
I'm a practical man, you know. Anyway, my statue.
Okay, yes, so you want to give it a St. Peter look, a beard, a robe, a book in hand?
Book? Boring. Give me a halberd. No, a lance. No, a cannon. A catapult.
It sounds a little expensive project. How about just a sword?
Aw, not even an arquebus.
Sword or book?
You're boring.
All
right. But no robes.
Then how should I dress you?
Well, I like a look that says, "Hey, I'm a warrior pope, and I will smack you with my stick." But I'm also approachable if you want to head onto the tavern for a drink, especially if you're a lady.
And what would that look like?
Well, I was thinking flip-flops, hot pants, and naked torso with whipping muscles.
That sounds interesting. May I take some artistic license?
Artistic license, eh? Well, I suppose you creative types can't have your flares smothered. just make sure that you do have a really interesting hat. And
What?
in the hand that is not holding the sword, I would like a turnip.
A turnip? Why?
I have my reasons.